How's it going, and welcome to Villains Voiced, a series where I go over your favorite villains that you love to hate. In today's video, we'll be taking a dive into the Arcane Brotherhood, a delightful cast of characters that are colorful in their own regard. Before I go into anything major, I must warn you that there will be spoilers, so players that plan on playing in this module do not watch this. But DMs who want added insight on how we can dive into all these characters, go ahead and stick around because we have a lot to cover. And here they are, the 4 members of the Arcane Brotherhood that are not locked up in Icewind Dale. These 4 have recently arrived in Icewind Dale, and they are on the hunt for something. They know that buried deep beneath the ice somewhere around this land is the lost city of Ythryn. Now, how do they get to the lost city of Ythryn? They don't know yet, but that is what they've arrived here to discover. But they're not working together, they are going on their own separate ways and trying to figure this thing out. Of course, in the book, it tells us where they all go. Nass Lantomir goes to the Island of Solstice, gets herself killed. Dzaan finds the lost spire of Ythryn and then gets himself killed, but his simulacrum's still at the lost spire. Averice is chilling with some cultists, and Vellyne Harpelle just magically shows up out of thin air when the dragon arrives. I say go ahead and scrap all of that, and allow your players to interact with the Arcane Brotherhood at least one time before they go their separate ways. But more importantly, allow your players to choose their alliances, form an allegiance with one of these members, and have them be a primary quest giver, and have them be the one to help them out when the dragon attacks. So let's go ahead and roleplay this out, where your players get to meet every single member individually before they go about their separate ways. Sitting in the corner of the tavern will be 2 individuals, one sitting over and one standing guard. The one sitting down has a wizard's hat, and if your players approach him, he will go ahead and turn around and say, "I'm Dzaan, an illusion mage, and there is more to me than meets the eye. And trust me, I know how to throw more than just mere illusions around." If your players ask who that person is standing right next to him, he can go ahead and say, "Oh, that's Krintess. He can stomach the cold better than most, and he's been with me through thick and thin." Should your players ask where this fine individual is going, he will go ahead and say, "I think I found some ruins around here that I'd like to take a gander at. Icewind Dale is as old as time, and I'm sure there's some great places hidden around here waiting to be plundered." If the conversation starts going and they ask why he is here, he can go ahead and say, "Well, where I come from, it's hot and the sun makes life miserable. I always wanted to flip that around and compare the two to see which one is better." He is, of course, not going to reveal that he's an Arcane Brotherhood member, and he's not going to reveal that he is a red wizard, because that would certainly make things look bad for him. So if your players start interacting with this individual, and he becomes a go-to kind of guy that your players interact with, he could go ahead and let slip that there's more to his mission than meets the eye. And more importantly, he could be the one that slips that there is, in fact, a lost spire around here, and that can prompt your players to go ahead and investigate. And if he is the one that your players ally themselves with, when the dragon comes to destroy the 10 towns, he will be the one that shows up. He is going to show up with some dog sleds and maybe some axe beaks, and he will go ahead and yell out to the players, "Alright, we have some towns to save. I hate the idea of having nothing to go back to after all this is over." If your players ask about the other Arcane Brotherhood members that are located around Icewind Dale, he can go ahead and spill the beans. However, he's not going to be that encouraging of the others. He's going to go ahead and say things like, "Vellyne's a weak old woman who merely gets by on a name. Must be nice being born with all that privilege. Nass looks to the future and never looks back on her mistakes, and believe me, she makes quite a few. Averice is pure evil. You can see it in her eyes. You can practically smell the brimstone coming off of her." Now, he could be the one to lead your players all the way to O'Reilly's abode, and maybe to the Caves of Hunger and Ythryn itself, but he could merely be a roadblock in the player's way if they've allied with someone else. If your players antagonize this individual and attack him, he will go ahead and expout to the party, "You can't hit what you can't see, and I'm going to make sure you won't be seeing anything ever again." He's going to use everything to the best of his ability. He will go ahead and use simulacrums. He will use all the spells at his disposal. And of course, he will be using Krintess, his undead assistant. But if these things are not enough to stop your players from downing this individual, in his dying breaths, he will expout, "Damn, just a few more missions, and I would have been given lichdom." And that's just a quick little introduction to Dzaan. So let's go ahead and move on to the next individual, Nass Lantomir. Now, of course, Nass Lantomir in the book is dead from the get-go, but I say go ahead and scrap that, allow your players to at least meet her before she dies, if not, have her be a bigger part of this whole campaign. When your players meet Nass Lantomir for the first time, she can go ahead and say, "It is good to finally meet you. I believe we have a great future ahead of ourselves. I have gotten ahead of myself here. I am Nass Lantomir, a diviner." Unlike all the other Arcane Brotherhood members, she doesn't actually have any assistants or anything of that nature. She simply has herself and herself alone. She can have a crystal ball, and that could portend that she's a diviner, hey. But as we all know, Nass Lantomir is going to actually steal something from Vellyne Harpelle, a Professor Orb. If your players ask where she is going, she can go ahead and say, "Oh, I foresaw great things in my future if I were to head west. Who knows what's out there?" And of course, she is in fact referring to Auriel's abode, because in fact, you need to go to Auriel's abode in order to get to the lost city of Ythryn. She may not know that yet, but she may go ahead and stumble across this understanding later on, and she could potentially drag the party along with her. If your players ask what she's doing here, she can go ahead and say, "I need to grow in power, and I know there are things in this land which can help me in that regard. I will search high and low for magic in this land." And that is true. She stowed away onto this trek because she knows that she is not as powerful as she needs to be. The superiors in the Arcane Brotherhood see that she is not that strong, and she's going to do everything she can to go ahead and amend that. If she gets her hands on some of the artifacts in the lost city of Ythryn, that will certainly increase her power. Now, your players may decide to go ahead and ally themselves with a diviner because, hey, it would make sense to go ahead and have a friend that could portend the future. That seems like a pretty powerful ability. She can be the one that goes ahead and hands out some quests. She can go ahead and use the party to the best of her ability. And when the time comes, she'll be the one to escort them all the way to the Isle of Solstice. If she is the fated ally when the dragon goes ahead and attacks, she will go ahead and show up with her own little fleet of dog sleds and axebeaks, and she will go ahead and say, "It didn't take magic to see that you needed help. Come now, let's put an end to it before this small civilization is killed." If your players interact with Vellyne Harpelle at all, Vellyne might reveal that Nass Lantomir is the one that stole her Professor Orb, and in fact actually killed some of her kobold assistants. If your players confront Nass Lantomir about this exchange, she will go ahead and say, "Why yes, I took it. I needed it more than that old bat anyhow. The knowledge this object possesses serves a far greater purpose to me than to anyone else. And should you work with me, it will help you as well." And that is true. That Professor Orb will certainly help out anybody who possesses it because of the immense knowledge that it has on Ythryn society, and potentially some other big things, such as a Tarrasque. Your players may ask Nass Lantomir about her opinions on the other Arcane Brotherhood members, and Nass Lantomir is not going to hold back. She's going to go ahead and say, "Dzaan is a depraved deplorable. Vellyne is a filthy necromancer and commits evil magical taboos. Averice is a power-hungry individual who only works for herself." Nass Lantomir could make a pretty strong ally, but of course she could be a potential enemy. If your players encounter her at some point after they've allied themselves with some other Arcane Brotherhood member, and they go ahead and strike out at her, she will go ahead and say, "I know I won't die here. I see myself achieving far greater things." However, there is a reason why she is not a powerful diviner. She can't see everything. She may try and convince herself that she sees herself going to great heights and great places, but that might simply not be the case. If you go ahead and run it more as written, and your players find the ghost of Nass Lantomir out there on the island of Solstice, she can go ahead and say to them, as she appears in a ghostly form, "Let me inside you. I need to uncover more of the mystery of the lost Netherese city. I know how to break through the Ragged Glacier, and the key is located on this very isle." If she goes ahead and puts herself into one of the PC's bodies, or maybe even one of the NPC's bodies, your players can go ahead and escort her to Grimskull, where they can finally find the Codicil of White. And if she is given the Codicil of White, whether that be right there or at where her body is located, she can go ahead and say, "Good. Very good. Now you can discover what lies within the lost city. Whatever it is, use it. And don't you dare let others waste the power you may come to possess." And with that, her spirit will be appeased, and she will go ahead and move on to the afterlife. Now, Nass Lantomir is certainly a delight to roleplay as, but this next up-and-coming person is, in my opinion, my most favorite because she likes stepping on people, and she surrounds herself with people that like getting stepped on. Of course, we're talking about Averice. Your players are going to see an interesting sight, an albino tiefling who has surrounded herself with some statues. But, of course, when your players go to talk with Averice, she will go ahead and say, "I'm Averice, an evocation mage, and a strong one at that. Help me, and you shall be rewarded. Stand against me, and there will be hells to pay." Your players are, of course, going to be curious about this tiefling, but of course they're going to be curious about her companions. If your players ask about these, she'll go ahead and say, "My squawking familiar here is named Skelm. The gargoyles are Gargle and Gurgle. Believe me, I didn't pick the names." Your players are going to see the sour demeanor of Averice, but if they continue to talk to her, she may go ahead and grace them, because she sees the potential in the players. She knows that putting up with their talking might prove useful because she could use them later on. If your players ask where she is going, she can go ahead and say, "I have a few contacts around the 10 towns. They will put me up. I'm not one to willingly go out in the cold, so you won't be seeing me outside much." If your players ask what she is doing, she can go ahead and say, "The land of Icewind Dale is home to ancient magics. What those are and where they are at, I don't know yet, but I will be the one to uncover them." She is sizing up the party during this whole exchange. She's going to see if they are worthwhile and if they are not. If they do look like they're worthy, she can go ahead and be the one to give out some of those quests in chapters 1 and 2. It would make sense. If she wants some problem to be dealt with that could potentially harm her later on, then she's going to go ahead and use other people for it. But also there's some potential information to be discovered elsewhere around Icewind Dale, and she can go ahead and just have the players be the one to uncover that and bring that information back to her. But of course, your players could potentially accidentally stumble across where she is, because after this little exchange in whatever town you go ahead and deem where they meet them, Averice will go ahead and find herself at the castle in Caer Dineval. Your players may potentially get into a fight with the cultist there, or they could just simply sneak in. And if she is found there, she can go ahead and just simply reply, "I'm only here to keep out of the cold. I don't know what the people in here are up to, and quite frankly, I don't care. You won't find me standing in your way. Do what you do." And that is true. This is a win-win situation for her. If she has both the cultist and the players on her side, then that's great, more people to use. If the players go ahead and kill all the cultists, then that just proves the players are worthwhile using, and she's gonna definitely use them later on. But your players may get swept up into everything and go ahead and attack everyone that they see located in the castle. In which case, if she is attacked, she can just simply say, "I could kill you all, but I think you are more useful to me alive." And if that isn't enough to stop your players from advancing on the attack, and they go ahead and damage her, she can go ahead and say, "Perhaps your own little taste of hell is in order. Do try and not freeze to death." In which case, she will go ahead and let loose her special abilities. She will go ahead and damage the party, but once again, she doesn't want to kill them. Killing them's a waste. She knows that she can use them later on, whether they decide to be used or not. She can run away using a combination of fly, fog cloud, wall of ice, and whatever damage she decides to put out to go ahead and slow the party down. If Averice is the fated ally when the dragon goes ahead and strikes out against the towns, she will go ahead and show up with some cultists that are driving some dog sleds and some axe beaks, and she will go ahead and turn to the party and say, "I can't just sit around here and let the towns be destroyed. I need buildings to keep me warm." She doesn't particularly care about the 10 towns, but she does need some bastion of civilization to go ahead and conduct all of her work here. If your players go ahead and ask Averice about the other Arcane Brotherhood members, she is not gonna go ahead and be easy on them. She's gonna go ahead and say such things as, Dzaan is a fool that will get what's coming to him. Vellyne Harpelle is weak and surrounds herself with the undead. Nass Lantomir is so pathetic, she wasn't even invited on this expedition to begin with. Now, Averice could be the one that does some legwork going to the Island of Solstice, and she could, of course, trudge along in the Caves of Hunger. But when they arrive in the city of Ythryn, she will go ahead and look around and say, The large spire must be home to untold magics. We must bypass this force field as soon as possible. I want to study everything I can find. Now, she's not dumb. She's going to know that the Arcane Brotherhood's going to be right there on their trail, trying to go ahead and find the lost city of Ythryn, just like them. She's going to go ahead and tell the players, I won't work with any of the other imbeciles from the Arcane Brotherhood. We should deal with them if they reveal themselves. No doubt they will turn the magic they find in here against us. And as a friendly reminder, the Arcane Brotherhood cannot fight against each other. They may go ahead and use their agents against each other, or they may do underhanded tactics such as casting fireball above them and causing icicles or debris to fall on top of them, but the Arcane Brotherhood members cannot directly strike out against each other. Now, Averice, of course, is easily someone that could be hated, and if your players deliver a finishing blow against her, they will see an icy tomb beginning to cover her, and she will let out one last gasp of air saying, Levistus will not forgive you so easily. And hey, perhaps that could have some ramifications. If you've got any devil worshippers in your party, maybe striking out against one of the agents of a devil that your players worship could be detrimental. But once again, if they are working alongside a devil that opposes Levistus, maybe they'll get a boon. Who knows? Averice certainly has a big role to play in this adventure, but as written, the biggest one is Vellyne Harpelle. So let's start diving into that. Vellyne Harpelle, of course, gets a lot of information here in this book, but once again, don't play into the whole she just magically shows up out of thin air. What sense does that make? Have her introduced very early on. In fact, as soon as possible. Maybe session 0, session 1, whatever the case may be. Allow your players to see Vellyne. But the interesting thing is, when they see Vellyne, they're going to see that she is accompanied by a little squadron of kobolds, and that is going to obviously pique your players' interest. When your players go up to this woman for the very first time, she can go ahead and introduce herself by saying, I am Vellyne Harpelle. You very well know of the Harpelle family, famous and powerful wizards from the Ivy Mansion in Longsettle. I am just but one of many that hail from this great clan. Your players are obviously going to be curious about her little friends beside her. She's going to go ahead and say, These kobolds serve as my valets and guides here in this inhospitable land. They won't be causing any trouble here. They seem well trained enough. If your players ask where she happens to be going in this land, she's going to go ahead and say, I aim to travel to each of these towns, find which one is most accommodating to my specific needs, then reside there for some time. If your players ask why she's here in the first place, she will go ahead and say, I have it on good authority that there is more in this land than ice and snow, but you lot don't quite look like you would be of any help. Perhaps we could discuss the matter at a later time after you have proven yourself. And I promise you, telling your players that is an excellent driving motivation. If you tell your players that you're not good enough now, but you gotta prove it, then they will want to prove themselves. It's going to give them a driving factor in this campaign, and of course it's going to give your players a quest hub that Vellyne can be the one to go ahead and introduce them to other people in Icewind Dale, and give out some quests that locate all around the icy land. If she is the fated ally for when the dragon attacks, she's going to show up with some sled dogs. However, these sled dogs aren't going to be tired because they are undead. When she arrives, she's going to look to the party and say, Can we be of service? It's quite a long walk back to the towns, and it looks like time is of the essence. If your players ask about the other Arcane Brotherhood members, she is not gonna be kind in regarding them. She's gonna go ahead and say things like, Dzaan is a red wizard, the worst kind of people in the magical world. Nass Lantomir is a thief and a trickster.
I dare say she is in fact a charlatan. Averice is a heartless person who clearly doesn't let her actions weigh down on her soul.
Now, of course, after the dragon attack, Vellyne is going to let loose all the information about the Arcane Brotherhood and their plan to raid the lost city of Ythryn. She's going to go ahead and reveal all this information, and she's going to want to get her Professor Orb back. She's going to direct the players all the way to the Island of Solstice, hopefully get her orb back, get the Codicil White, then head over to Ythryn. After a long, tumultuous journey there, she's going to see the lost city of Ythryn, and she's going to expout.
We must search every building here. Think of the untold treasures we could accumulate. I must see what is here with my own eye. The other members of the Arcane Brotherhood will kill you at any moment's notice. Stick with me, and don't fall into any of their pathetic ruses.
And she is, of course, going to try and use the players as a meat shield for them. She is not natively evil like the rest of the people. However, she is clearly looking out for herself, and she is, to some extent, using the party. She may not kill them at any moment's time, but of course she is going to go ahead and not get herself killed. That's what all the kobolds are for, and that's what all the players are for. If your players meet Vellyne Harpelle in the lost city of Ythryn with her little swarm of kobolds, and they decide to attack her because they are allied with someone else, she will go ahead and tell them,
"You are making the biggest mistake of your pathetic lives. You have made an enemy of my family, and there is no coming back from that."
She will go ahead and try and heal herself up. She'll try and run away, and she'll strike whenever she has the opportunity. But if she is smote down, in her dying breath, she will look out and say,
"Someone will resurrect me. I know it."
And that could potentially be true. She is connected with a very powerful family, and maybe that family is rich and powerful enough to resurrect her. And just like that, we've taken a small dive into these characters. These characters really liven up the campaign. They really make it feel like there is more to this land than meets the eye. They certainly make the world feel more lived in and make them feel like they're not the only outsiders here. Use these 4 individuals as early as possible. Get them into the campaign. Mind you, you don't have to be using all 4 of them the entire time. They don't need to be bumping into these people left, right, and center. But at least one of these people should be a quest giver. At least one of these people should be the fated ally. That's not just Vellyne Harpelle. Because having Vellyne just show up out of thin air makes really no sense. Your players could theoretically skip over Averice in the campaign because they don't go to the castle. They could theoretically skip over Dzaan because they never go to East Haven, or they never go to the Lost Spire of Ythryn, and that just feels boring. If they don't have any interaction at all with the Arcane Brotherhood, then it feels like something's missing from this campaign. So use them. Get them in and have a blast with them. Especially if you introduce all 4 early on in the campaign, then your players get to sit down and decide who they want to ally themselves with. Do they think that Nass Lantomir could be useful? Do they believe that Averice could be a very powerful ally? Do they think that Dzaan knows a bit more about what's going on around here? And maybe they think that Vellyne has some connections. Who knows? Skies are the limit. Your players are going to be the deciding factor in all this, so allow them to go ahead and take the wheel. That is going to do it for this Villains Voiced. Thank you so much for listening. I have a blast with the Arcane Brotherhood, and I know for a fact if you get them into the campaign, you will too. So go ahead and tell me, how do you plan on using the Arcane Brotherhood in your campaign? I want to know because I love to hear it. I know a ton of people are taking these characters in so many different ways, and do it. Make them your own. Make this faction feel like an actual faction in the campaign, and not just some sort of afterthought, and not just some exposition dump. That is going to do it for me for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all my lovely patrons up here. You guys are absolutely incredible. Thank you so very much. That is going to do it for me for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.